The security guard grabbed the man by his collar and slammed him against the polished marble floor of Westfield Grand Mall. Shopping bags scattered everywhere. People screamed and pulled out their phones to record. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" the guard shouted, his voice echoing through the crowded atrium. The man on the floor, Derek Thompson, looked confused. His expensive watch glinted under the bright lights. His designer suit was now wrinkled and dirty. "Get your hands off me," Derek yelled. "I'm a successful businessman. I'll have your job for this." But the guard didn't move. Instead, 3 more guards rushed over. Behind them came 2 men in black suits with earpieces. They looked like they protected presidents. "Sir," one of the men in black said into his wrist, "we have the situation under control. The target has been secured. Mrs. Wellington is safe." "Mrs. Wellington." Derek's face went pale. His mouth fell open. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She wore a simple blue dress, but everything about her screamed elegance. Diamond earrings sparkled in her ears. A beautiful necklace hung around her neck. Her natural hair was styled perfectly, and her skin glowed like honey in sunlight. Derek knew that face. He knew it better than anyone. It was Grace, his ex-wife, the woman he had thrown out of his house 3 years ago with nothing but the clothes on her back. The woman he had just kicked to the ground in front of hundreds of people because she accidentally bumped into him. "Grace," he whispered, his voice cracking, but you're supposed to be, you were homeless. I made sure you had nothing." Grace looked down at him with eyes that held no anger, only pity. "Hello, Derek," she said softly. Then a tall man appeared beside her. He was dark-skinned, handsome, with silver hair at his temples that made him look distinguished. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, but even Derek could tell they cost more than his entire outfit. The man put his arm protectively around Grace. "Sweetheart," the man said, "are you hurt? Should I call the doctor?" "I'm fine, Marcus," Grace said. "Really, I am." Marcus, Derek's brain was spinning. Why did that name sound so familiar? Then it hit him like a truck. Marcus Wellington, the billionaire who owned half the technology companies in America, the man whose face was on the cover of Fortune magazine just last month, the man worth over $12 billion. And Grace had called him sweetheart. The crowd had grown larger now. People whispered and pointed. Someone said, "Isn't that Marcus Wellington, the tech billionaire?" Another person gasped, "Oh my God, that man just kicked Mrs. Wellington." Derek felt the world spinning around him. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a nightmare. His poor, pathetic ex-wife, the woman he had abandoned and humiliated, was now married to one of the richest men in the country. "How?" Derek stammered. "When? I don't understand." Marcus Wellington looked at Derek with cold, hard eyes. "You don't understand? Let me make it simple for you. This beautiful woman, whom you just assaulted in public, is my wife, and you made the biggest mistake of your miserable life." But how did we get here? How did Grace go from being a broken, abandoned woman to the wife of a billionaire? And what will happen to Derek now? Before we continue, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Back to a small house on Maple Street, where a young woman named Grace believed in the power of love. 3 years ago, Grace Thompson was the happiest woman in the world, or at least she thought she was. She had been married to Derek for 5 years. They had met in college, where Grace was studying to become a nurse and Derek was studying business. Derek was charming back then. He would bring her flowers every Friday. He would walk her to class in the rain, holding an umbrella over her head while he got soaked. He would tell her she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Grace had grown up poor. Her mother, Dorothy, had raised her alone after her father passed away when Grace was just 7 years old. They never had much money, but they had love. Dorothy worked 2 jobs to make sure Grace could go to school. She taught Grace that kindness was the most important thing in the world. Baby girl, Dorothy would say, it doesn't matter how much money you have. What matters is how you treat people. A kind heart is worth more than all the gold in the world. Grace carried those words with her everywhere. When Derek proposed after graduation, Grace said yes without hesitation. She loved him with her whole heart. She believed he loved her too. But things changed after they got married. At first, it was small things. Derek would come home late without calling. He would forget their anniversary. He would make little comments about Grace's clothes or her hair or her cooking. "Why can't you be more like other wives?" he would say. "Look at my colleague's wife. She always looks perfect." Grace tried harder. She cooked better meals. She bought nicer clothes even though they couldn't really afford them. She did everything she could to make Derek happy. But nothing was ever good enough. Then Derek got a promotion at his company. Suddenly, he was making more money than they had ever had. Grace was excited. She thought this would make things better. She was wrong. The more money Derek made, the worse he treated Grace. He started coming home at midnight. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. When Grace asked where he was, he would yell at her. "I'm out making money to support us. What do? You just sit at home doing nothing." But Grace wasn't doing nothing. She had given up her nursing career because Derek insisted she stay home. He wanted a traditional wife, he said, someone to cook and clean and be there when he got home. So Grace did that every single day. She cleaned the house until it sparkled. She cooked meals from scratch. She ironed his shirts and polished his shoes. She did everything a good wife should do. But Derek didn't see any of it. One evening, Derek came home with a woman on his arm. Grace was in the kitchen making his favorite dinner, baked chicken with mashed potatoes and gravy. The smell filled the whole house. She heard the front door open and smiled. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to greet her husband. But when she saw who was with him, her smile disappeared. "Derek," Grace said, her voice shaking, "who is this?" The woman was tall and thin, with long straight hair and perfect makeup. She wore a tight red dress and high heels that clicked on the hardwood floor. "This is Veronica," Derek said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "She's coming over for dinner." Grace looked at the woman, then back at Derek. "But I only made enough for two." Derek laughed. It was a cruel sound. "Then you should have made more. Veronica, sit down. Grace will serve us." Grace felt her heart breaking into a million pieces, but she was raised to be polite. Her mother had taught her to always be kind, even when others weren't. So Grace served dinner to her husband and this strange woman. She watched them laugh together, touch each other's hands, share looks that husband and wife should share. Grace ate nothing. She couldn't. Her stomach was in knots. After dinner, Veronica left. Derek went straight to bed without even looking at Grace. That night, Grace lay awake on the couch, tears streaming down her face. "Mama," she whispered into the darkness, "what do I do? You always said kindness matters, but I've been kind, and look where it got me." But Grace's mother wasn't there to answer. Dorothy had passed away 2 years into Grace's marriage, a sudden heart attack. Grace had been devastated. She had lost the only family she had. Now she felt truly alone. The next few months were torture. Veronica started coming over more and more. She acted like she owned the house. She would criticize Grace's cooking, her cleaning, even the way she dressed. And Derek let her. No, it was worse than that. Derek encouraged her. "Veronica's right," he would say. "You really should try harder, Grace. You're embarrassing me." Grace didn't know what to do. She had no money of her own. Derek controlled all the bank accounts. She had no family left. She had lost touch with most of her friends because Derek didn't like her going out. She was trapped. Then one day, everything fell apart completely. Grace came home from grocery shopping to find all her clothes on the front lawn. Her books, her pictures. Everything she owned was scattered in the grass like garbage. Derek stood on the porch with Veronica beside him, her arm wrapped around his waist. What is this?" Grace stammered, dropping the grocery bags. It's over, Grace, Derek said coldly. I want a divorce. Veronica is moving in. Grace felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Derek, please, we can talk about this. We can work it out. I love you. Derek laughed, that same cruel laugh. Love? You think I ever loved you? I married you because you were convenient. You were grateful, desperate. You never questioned anything. But now I don't need someone like you anymore. I need a real woman. Veronica smirked. Better luck next time, honey. Grace's whole world shattered. Please, she begged, tears running down her face. Where will I go? I have nothing. You know I have nothing. Derek shrugged. Not my problem. You have 30 minutes to take what you can carry. After that, I'm calling the police. Grace looked at her belongings scattered on the lawn. Her mother's photo album, her nursing school books, the dress she wore on her wedding day. She gathered what she could into 2 small bags. As she walked down the driveway, Derek called out one last thing. Good luck, Grace. You're going to need it. Nobody's going to want someone as pathetic as you. Grace didn't look back. She couldn't. She walked and walked until her feet hurt. She had nowhere to go, no money, no family, no friends. She found a bench in the park and sat down. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. It was beautiful, but Grace couldn't appreciate it. She was numb. Excuse me, a voice said. Grace looked up. An elderly woman stood in front of her. She had white hair, kind brown eyes, and a warm smile. She was wearing a simple green dress and carrying a basket. I'm sorry to bother you, dear, the woman said, but you look like you could use some company, and maybe something to eat. Grace wanted to say no, she wanted to be alone, but something about the woman's gentle face reminded her of her own mother. I don't want to trouble you, Grace said, her voice hoarse from crying. The old woman sat down on the bench beside her. It's no trouble at all. My name is Henrietta. What's yours? Grace. Grace, Henrietta repeated. What a beautiful name. You know, grace is one of the most powerful things in the world. It means showing kindness even when it's not deserved. Grace started crying again. She couldn't help it. Henrietta put an arm around her. There, child. Whatever happened, it's going to be all right. I promise you. How do you know? Grace sobbed. You don't even know me. Henrietta smiled mysteriously. Sometimes, God puts people in our path for a reason. Maybe I was meant to find you today. Maybe your story is just beginning. She reached into her basket and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in paper. Here, she said, eat this, and then, if you'd like, you can tell me what happened, or you don't have to. Either way, you're not alone anymore. Grace took the sandwich with shaking hands. She took a bite. It was simple, just ham and cheese, but it tasted like the best thing she had ever eaten. As she ate, she told Henrietta everything, about Derek, about Veronica, about being thrown out with nothing. Henrietta listened without interrupting. When Grace finished, the old woman nodded slowly. That man, Henrietta said, made a terrible mistake. He threw away a treasure because he couldn't see its value. But that's not your fault, Grace. His blindness is not your failure. But what do I do now? Grace asked. I have nothing. Henrietta stood up and extended her hand. You come with me. I have a spare room. You can stay as long as you need. Grace hesitated. I couldn't. I don't want to be a burden. Nonsense, Henrietta said firmly. Everyone needs help sometimes. And besides, I could use the company. My house gets lonely since my husband passed. Something in Grace's heart said to trust this woman. Maybe it was the kindness in her eyes. Maybe it was the fact that Grace had nowhere else to go. Or maybe it was something else entirely, a force greater than both of them getting their paths together. Grace took Henrietta's hand and stood up. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Henrietta patted her hand. Don't thank me yet, dear. Something tells me you're going to end up helping me more than I help you. They walked together as the stars began appearing in the sky. Grace didn't know it yet, but this chance meeting would change her life forever. What Grace also didn't know was that Henrietta was not just any old woman. She was the mother of one of the richest men in America. And she had just found exactly what she was looking for. Henrietta's house was not what Grace expected. When the old woman had offered her a place to stay, Grace imagined a small cottage, maybe a simple apartment. What she found instead made her stop in her tracks and stare with her mouth wide open. The house was enormous. No, not a house, a mansion. It sat on top of a hill, surrounded by beautiful gardens that stretched as far as Grace could see. Fountains sparkled in the moonlight. Rose bushes lined the pathway leading to the front door. The building itself was 3 stories tall, with huge windows and elegant columns. This is where you live," Grace stammered. Henrietta chuckled softly. "Yes, dear, I know it's a bit much, but it's been in the family for generations. Come inside, you must be exhausted." Grace followed Henrietta through the massive front doors. The inside was even more impressive than the outside. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Beautiful paintings decorated the walls. A grand staircase curved upward like something from a fairy tale. But despite all the wealth, the house felt warm, cozy even. There were family photos everywhere, fresh flowers on every table. The smell of something delicious cooking drifted from somewhere deep inside. "Henrietta," Grace said carefully, "I don't understand. If you live in a place like this, why were you in the park with a basket of sandwiches?" Henrietta smiled mysteriously. "I go there every week. I like to help people who need it. You never know what treasures you might find." A woman in a maid's uniform appeared. "Mrs. Wellington, welcome home. Shall I prepare the guest room?" Wellington, the name tickled something in Grace's memory, but she was too tired and overwhelmed to think about it. "Yes, please, Rosa," Henrietta said, "and prepare a hot bath as well. Our guest has had a very long day." Rosa nodded and hurried away. Henrietta led Grace to a comfortable sitting room with plush sofas and a crackling fireplace. She gently pushed Grace into a chair. "Now," Henrietta said, sitting across from her, "I want you to rest tonight. Don't worry about anything. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what comes next." Grace felt tears welling up again. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." Henrietta reached over and took Grace's hands in her own. Her skin was soft, but her grip was strong. "Because I know what it's like to feel lost," Henrietta said. "When I was your age, I had nothing either. I was a poor girl from Mississippi, working as a maid to support my family. I never dreamed I would end up here." "What happened?" Grace asked. Henrietta's eyes got a faraway look. "I met a man who saw past my circumstances. He saw my heart, my spirit, my potential. He married me when everyone told him he was crazy. He was from a wealthy family, and they said I was just after his money. But he knew the truth. He knew that real love doesn't care about bank accounts." She squeezed Grace's hands. "My husband taught me something important. He said, 'Henrietta, always remember where you came from, and always help those who are walking the same path you once walked.'" "He sounds like a wonderful man," Grace said softly. "He was," Henrietta smiled. "He passed away 5 years ago, but not a day goes by that I don't think about him, and not a day goes by that I don't try to live by his words." Rosa appeared in the doorway. "The room is ready, Mrs. Wellington." Henrietta stood and helped Grace to her feet. "Go rest now. Things will look brighter in the morning, I promise." That night, Grace slept in the softest bed she had ever touched. The sheets were like silk. The pillows were like clouds. But despite the comfort, she cried herself to sleep, thinking about everything she had lost. The next morning, Grace woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came flooding back. Derek, Veronica, her belongings scattered on the lawn, the park, Henrietta. She got up and looked around the room. Her 2 small bags sat in the corner, looking sad and out of place in the beautiful space. On a chair near the window, someone had laid out fresh clothes, a simple but elegant blue dress, new undergarments, even a pair of shoes. Grace got dressed and made her way downstairs, following the smell of breakfast. She found Henrietta in a sunny dining room, reading a newspaper and sipping tea. The table was covered with food: eggs, bacon, pancakes, fruit, pastries, juice, coffee, more food than Grace had seen in months. "Good morning, dear," Henrietta said cheerfully. Sit, eat, you need to build your strength." Grace sat down hesitantly. "Henrietta, I can't stay here forever. I need to find a job, a place to live. I need to figure out my life." "And you will," Henrietta said calmly. "But not today. Today you rest and eat and heal. The world will still be there tomorrow." Grace wanted to argue, but her stomach growled loudly. Henrietta laughed, and despite everything, Grace found herself laughing too. She ate until she couldn't eat anymore. It had been so long since she had a proper meal. Derek had always complained about how much food cost. He gave her a small allowance for groceries and expected her to make it stretch for weeks. After breakfast, Henrietta gave Grace a tour of the house. There was a library filled with thousands of books, a music room with a grand piano, a garden with vegetables and herbs, a swimming pool that sparkled like a jewel. "This is incredible," Grace said. "It's just a house," Henrietta shrugged. "What makes it special is the people inside. And speaking of people, I should tell you something." They had stopped in front of a large portrait. It showed a young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He was handsome, with dark skin and strong features. Something about him seemed familiar, but Grace couldn't place it. "This is my son," Henrietta said. "Marcus." Grace nodded politely. "He looks nice." Henrietta smiled in that mysterious way of hers. "He is. He's also very successful, perhaps too successful. He works all the time, never takes breaks, never has fun. I worry about him." "That must be hard," Grace said. "It is," Henrietta sighed. "I keep telling him that money isn't everything, that he needs to find someone to share his life with, but he doesn't listen to his old mother." Grace felt a pang of sympathy. Maybe he's just focused on his work. Some people are like that. "Maybe," Henrietta said, "but I think he's scared. He's had women try to use him for his money. It's made him distrustful. He's built walls around his heart so high that no one can climb over them." They continued the tour, but Grace kept thinking about the portrait, about the sad look hidden behind the man's smile. She knew what it felt like to have walls around your heart. Days passed, then weeks. Grace tried several times to leave, to find a job, to start her life over, but each time Henrietta convinced her to stay just a little longer. "Help me with the garden," Henrietta would say, or "I need company for tea," or "My back hurts, could you read to me?" Grace couldn't say no. Henrietta had saved her. The least she could do was help the old woman. And truthfully, Grace was starting to heal. The constant knot of fear in her stomach was loosening. She was eating properly, sleeping well, smiling even. Henrietta treated her not like a charity case, but like family. One afternoon, Grace was in the garden, picking tomatoes. She had discovered she loved gardening. There was something peaceful about working with plants, watching them grow, nurturing them. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear anyone approach. "Who are you?" Grace jumped and spun around. A man stood there, tall and imposing. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of suspicion. It was the man from the portrait, Marcus. But in person, he was even more striking. His presence filled the entire garden. His eyes, deep brown, almost black, studied Grace like she was a puzzle to be solved. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice cold. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my mother's garden?" Grace's heart was pounding. I'm Grace. Your mother invited me to stay here." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Did she? How convenient. And how long have you been staying here?" "About 3 weeks." 3 weeks, he stepped closer. "And in those 3 weeks, I'm sure you've learned all about my mother's wealth, her connections, her generous heart that people love to take advantage of." Grace felt anger rising in her chest. "I'm not taking advantage of anyone." "That's what they all say," Marcus said bitterly, "right before they ask for a check." "I haven't asked for anything," Grace shot back. Your mother helped me when I had nowhere to go. I've been trying to leave, but she keeps asking me to stay. I cook for her, I clean, I help in the garden. I'm not here for money." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't care what you believe," Grace said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I know who I am, I know my character, and I don't need some arrogant man in a fancy suit to validate me." They stared at each other, tension crackling in the air. "Marcus," Henrietta's voice rang out. She was walking toward them with a wide smile. "You're here. I didn't expect you until tonight." Marcus's cold expression softened slightly when he saw his mother. "I finished my meetings early. I wanted to surprise you." Henrietta reached them and hugged her son. Then she turned to Grace. "I see you've met our Grace. Isn't she wonderful? She's been such a help to me." "Yes," Marcus said flatly, his eyes still on Grace. "Wonderful." Henrietta looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Come inside, both of you. Rosa is making lemonade." As they walked toward the house, Henrietta linked her arm through Grace's. "Don't mind Marcus," she whispered. "He's suspicious of everyone. He thinks every woman he meets wants his money." "Every woman," Grace whispered back. "He must be very rich." Henrietta gave her a strange look. "Grace, dear, do you not know who my son is?" Grace shook her head. "Should I?" Henrietta laughed softly. "Oh, this is going to be interesting." That evening, dinner was awkward. Marcus barely spoke, and when he did, it was in clipped sentences. He kept watching Grace like he was waiting for her to do something wrong. Grace did her best to ignore him. She focused on her food and on Henrietta's cheerful conversation. "Marcus," Henrietta said, "did I tell you that Grace used to be a nurse? She had to give up her career when she got married, but she was at the top of her class." Marcus looked at Grace with slightly less hostility. "Is that so?" "Yes," Grace said simply. She didn't feel like explaining her life to someone who had already judged her. "Why did you give it up?" Marcus asked. Grace set down her fork. "My husband wanted me to stay home. He said a wife's place was in the house, taking care of her family." "And you agreed with that?" "I believed in my marriage," Grace said quietly. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "And where is your husband now?" Henrietta cut in quickly. "Marcus, that's enough." But Grace met Marcus's eyes directly. "He threw me out, replaced me with another woman. I left with nothing but 2 bags. Your mother found me in the park, crying on a bench. She saved my life." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. The suspicion didn't disappear, but a crack appeared in it. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like the words cost him effort. "That must have been difficult." "It was," Grace said, "but your mother taught me something important. She said that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the beginning of something better. I'm choosing to believe her." Marcus said nothing, but for the first time, he looked at Grace like she might be a real person, not just a threat. After dinner, Grace helped Rosa clear the dishes. As she carried plates to the kitchen, she overheard voices in the hallway. "Mother, how much do you actually know about this woman?" Marcus was saying. "I know enough," Henrietta replied. "I know she's kind. I know she's hardworking. I know she's been hurt badly and she's trying to heal." "That's not enough. You're too trusting. Remember what happened with—" "That was different," Henrietta interrupted. "Grace is different. I can feel it." "You can feel it," Marcus repeated skeptically. "Yes, call it intuition, call it faith, but I believe Grace came into our lives for a reason, and I'm not going to turn her away because you're afraid of getting hurt again." There was a long pause. "I'm not afraid," Marcus said quietly. "Yes, you are," Henrietta said gently, "and I understand. After what Vanessa did to you, anyone would be, but you can't close your heart forever, Marcus. It's no way to live." Grace quietly slipped away, feeling guilty for eavesdropping, but her mind was spinning. Who was Vanessa? What had she done to Marcus? And why did Grace suddenly care about the answers? That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the conversation. About Marcus's cold eyes, and the pain hiding behind them, about how she had defended herself in the garden without backing down. For so long, Derek had made her feel small, worthless. He had crushed her spirit piece by piece until she didn't recognize herself anymore. But today, standing up to Marcus, she had felt something she hadn't felt in years. She had felt strong. The next morning, Grace woke early and went to the garden before sunrise. She wanted some time alone to think. But someone else had the same idea. Marcus was sitting on a stone bench, staring at the horizon. He looked different without his suit jacket, more human, more vulnerable. Grace hesitated, wondering if she should leave, but before she could decide, Marcus turned and saw her. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Grace shook her head. "I like watching the sunrise." "Me too," Marcus said. "It reminds me that every day is a new beginning." Grace walked over and sat on the other end of the bench, leaving space between them. They watched the sky change colors in silence: orange, pink, gold, purple. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I owe you an apology for yesterday." Grace looked at him, surprised. "I was rude," Marcus continued. "I made assumptions about you without knowing your story. That wasn't fair." "No," Grace agreed, "it wasn't." "I've had people try to get close to me for my money before," Marcus said. "It's made me cautious." "Cautious is one word for it," Grace said dryly. To her surprise, Marcus laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. "You don't hold back, do you?" he said. "I used to," Grace said. "I used to be afraid of saying what I really thought, but I'm trying to change that." Marcus nodded slowly. "Good, don't let anyone take your voice away." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. "My mother likes you," Marcus said finally. "That doesn't happen often. She's a good judge of character." "She's a wonderful woman," Grace said. "She didn't have to help me, but she did." "That's who she is," Marcus said. "She believes everyone deserves kindness, even when they don't deserve it." Grace thought about that. "My mother was the same way. She always said a kind heart is worth more than all the gold in the world." Marcus turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time without suspicion. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise." "She was," Grace said softly. "I miss her every day." Something passed between them, an understanding, a connection. Then Marcus's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He looked at the screen and sighed. "I have to go, business calls." He stood up and started to leave, but he stopped and turned back. "Grace." "Yes." Would you like to have dinner with me, just the two of us? I'd like to hear more about you, the real you." Grace's heart did something funny in her chest. "I'd like that." Marcus smiled. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and lighter. "Tonight then, 7 o'clock. He walked away, and Grace sat in the garden, watching the sun rise fully into the sky. For the first time since Derek had thrown her out, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Hope. But miles away, in a sleek office downtown, Derek Thompson was having a very different kind of morning. He was standing at his desk, staring at a letter in his hands. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. The letter was from a law firm, a very powerful law firm. And the news was devastating. His company was being bought out. All his shares, his investments, his position, everything he had worked for was about to be taken from him. And the company buying him out, Wellington Technologies. Derek had never met Marcus Wellington personally, but everyone knew who he was, the billionaire genius who destroyed competitors without mercy. And now Marcus Wellington was coming for Derek. Derek crumpled the letter in his fist. "This isn't over," he growled. "I'm not going to lose everything, not to anyone." He picked up his phone and made a call. "Veronica, we have a problem, a big one." Derek paced back and forth in his office, his expensive shoes wearing a path in the carpet. Veronica sat on the leather couch, filing her nails like she didn't have a care in the world. "Did you hear what I said?" Derek snapped. "Wellington Technologies is buying us out. We're going to lose everything." Veronica looked up lazily. "So what do you want me to do about it?" "I don't know." Derek threw his hands in the air. "Think of something. You're supposed to be smart." Veronica rolled her eyes. "Derek, calm down. There has to be a way out of this. What about your investors? Can't they help?" "They're jumping ship," Derek said bitterly. "The moment they heard Wellington was involved, they ran like scared rabbits. Nobody wants to go against that man." "Then maybe you should meet with him," Veronica suggested. "Talk to him, make a deal." Derek laughed harshly. "You think I haven't tried? His people won't even return my calls. It's like I'm invisible to him." He slammed his fist on the desk. 3 years ago, I was on top of the world. I had the perfect life, the perfect career. Everything was going my way. And now? "Now you're being dramatic," Veronica said, standing up and walking over to him. She put her arms around his neck. "We'll figure this out. We always do." But Derek wasn't comforted. He kept thinking about how quickly everything had fallen apart. First, the investors started pulling back. Then the clients began canceling contracts. Then the board members started asking questions he couldn't answer. It was like someone was systematically destroying his life, piece by piece. But who and why? Meanwhile, across the city, Grace was preparing for her dinner with Marcus. She stood in front of the mirror in her room, wearing a simple black dress that Henrietta had insisted she borrow. Her natural hair was styled nicely, and Rosa had helped her with just a touch of makeup. Grace barely recognized herself. She looked beautiful, not in the flashy way that Veronica was beautiful, but in a quiet, elegant way, like a flower that had finally bloomed after being kept in darkness. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Grace called. Henrietta entered, and her face lit up when she saw Grace. "Oh, my dear," she said, clasping her hands together. "You look absolutely stunning." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "It's too much, isn't it? I should change." "Don't you dare," Henrietta said firmly. "You look perfect. Marcus won't know what hit him." Grace turned back to the mirror, nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "Henrietta, I don't know if this is a good idea. Your son is. He's clearly very important, very wealthy. I'm nobody." Henrietta walked over and stood behind Grace, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Listen to me carefully," Henrietta said. "You are not nobody, you are Grace, a woman with a kind heart, a strong spirit, and more courage than you give yourself credit for. My son would be lucky to know you." "But—" "No buts," Henrietta interrupted. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you're not good enough, that you don't belong in this world. But that's Derek talking, not you. He spent years making you feel small. Don't let him win." Grace felt tears prickling her eyes. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" Henrietta smiled. "I've lived a long time, dear. I've learned a few things." She straightened Grace's collar and smoothed her hair. "Now go have fun. And remember, you deserve happiness just as much as anyone else." Grace hugged her tightly. "Thank you for everything." "Thank me by giving my son a chance," Henrietta whispered. "He needs someone like you in his life, even if he doesn't know it yet." Grace made her way downstairs, her heart beating fast. Marcus was waiting in the foyer, and when he saw her, he stopped mid-conversation with Rosa. For a long moment, he just stared. "You look," he started, then paused, like he couldn't find the right words. "You look incredible." Grace felt her face flush. "Thank you, you look nice too." Marcus was wearing a dark blue suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. It was more casual than yesterday, and it suited him. "Shall we?" He offered his arm. Grace took it, and they walked out to a waiting car. Not a limousine like Grace half expected, but a simple black sedan. Marcus opened the door for her himself. "I thought we'd go somewhere quiet," he said as they drove away. "I know a place." The restaurant was small and cozy, tucked away on a side street. It had checkered tablecloths and candles on every table. The kind of place where couples went for anniversaries or first dates. "This isn't what I expected," Grace admitted as they sat down. Marcus smiled. "What did you expect? Some fancy place with tiny portions and snooty waiters?" Grace laughed, "Maybe a little." "I hate those places," Marcus said. "The food is never as good as it's supposed to be. And everyone spends more time looking at each other than actually enjoying the meal. This place has the best Italian food in the city. My father used to bring my mother here every week." Grace looked around with new appreciation. "It's lovely." They ordered their food, pasta for Grace, steak for Marcus, and talked, really talked, not about money or business or the awkwardness of their first meeting, but about real things. Marcus told her about growing up with Henrietta and his father, about how his father had built Wellington Technologies from nothing, about how he had felt crushed by the pressure of taking over after his father died. "Everyone expected me to fail," he said. "They thought I was just a spoiled rich kid who didn't know anything about real work, so I worked twice as hard as everyone else. I made the company bigger than my father ever dreamed, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to live." "What do you mean?" Grace asked. Marcus swirled his wine glass thoughtfully. "I mean, I wake up, I work, I go to sleep, and then I do it all over again. I don't have friends, not real ones. I don't have hobbies. I haven't taken a vacation in 5 years. My whole life is numbers and meetings and deals." "That sounds lonely," Grace said softly. "It is," Marcus admitted, "but it's easier than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, trusting people, getting hurt. Grace nodded slowly. "Your mother mentioned someone named Vanessa." Marcus's jaw tightened. "My mother talks too much." "I'm sorry, you don't have to tell me." But Marcus shook his head. "No, it's okay. You shared your story with me. It's only fair I share mine." He took a deep breath. "Vanessa was my fiancée. We were together for 3 years. I thought she loved me. I thought we were going to spend our lives together. I was planning the wedding, looking at houses, imagining our future." He paused, pain flickering across his face. "Then I found out she had been stealing from me, funneling money from my accounts into her own, selling company secrets to competitors. She never loved me. She was using me the whole time." Grace felt her heart ache for him. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." "The worst part wasn't the money," Marcus continued. "Money can be replaced. The worst part was realizing that everything I thought we had was a lie. Every kiss, every smile, every I love you, all fake. She was just playing a role." He looked at Grace with eyes full of old wounds. "After that, I promised myself I would never let anyone get close enough to hurt me again. I built walls. I pushed people away. It was safer that way." "But lonelier," Grace said. "But lonelier," Marcus agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Grace spoke. "I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you loved, to feel like everything you believed was a lie, but I don't think the answer is closing yourself off forever." "No," Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you think the answer is?" Grace thought carefully before answering. I think we have to be brave enough to try again, even when we're scared, even when we've been hurt, because a life without love isn't really living, it's just existing." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. "You really believe that?" "I'm trying to," Grace said honestly. "Some days are harder than others, but your mother told me something when she found me in the park. She said that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the beginning of something better. I want to believe that's true." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm and gentle. "I want to believe it too," he said softly. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of good food and easy conversation. Grace learned that Marcus secretly loved comic books and had a collection worth thousands of dollars. Marcus learned that Grace used to sing in her church choir and could hit notes that made people cry. By the time they left the restaurant, Grace felt like she had known Marcus for years instead of days. They walked along the river, the city lights reflecting on the water. It was peaceful, perfect. "Thank you for tonight," Grace said. "I can't remember the last time I had this much fun." "Me neither," Marcus admitted. "Usually when I go to dinner, it's with boring businessmen who only want to talk about stocks and mergers. This was different." "Good different or bad different?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "Good different, very good different." They were standing close now, close enough that Grace could smell his cologne, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Grace," Marcus said, his voice low, "I know we barely know each other. I know you've been hurt. I know I've been terrible at showing emotions for years. But there's something about you that makes me want to try again." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "Marcus." "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just want you to know that I think you're remarkable, and I'd like to spend more time with you, if you'll let me." Grace felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Marcus smiled, that warm, genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and gently lifted her hand to his lips, placing a soft kiss on her knuckles. It was old-fashioned, romantic, nothing like the rough, careless way Derek used to touch her. They walked back to the car hand in hand, and Grace felt like she was floating. The next few months were like a dream. Marcus visited the mansion every weekend instead of once a month. He and Grace would spend hours talking, walking in the garden, cooking together. Henrietta watched them with a knowing smile, saying nothing but clearly pleased. Grace started working again too, not as a nurse, she wasn't ready for that yet, but at a free clinic downtown. She helped with administrative work at first, then slowly started helping with patients. The doctors there were kind and patient with her. "You have a gift," one of them told her. "The way you connect with people, they trust you, that's rare." Grace bloomed like a flower in spring. The haunted look in her eyes faded. She laughed more. She stood taller. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved good things. Marcus was changing too. He smiled more, worked less. His employees noticed and whispered among themselves, wondering what had happened to their cold, distant boss. One evening, 6 months after they first met, Marcus took Grace to the same restaurant where they'd had their first dinner. But this time, something was different. The restaurant was empty except for them. Candles covered every surface, casting a warm golden glow. A violinist played softly in the corner. "Marcus, what is this?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. Marcus took her hands in his. His own hands were shaking slightly. "Grace, when my mother first told me about you, I thought she was crazy. I thought you were just another person trying to take advantage of her kindness. I was wrong." He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. Grace's heart stopped. "You showed me that love isn't something to be afraid of. You showed me that kindness and strength can exist in the same person. You showed me how to live again, not just exist." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, a beautiful diamond ring that sparkled like stars. "Grace, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Grace's face. She couldn't speak, she could only nod. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Marcus slipped the ring on her finger and pulled her into his arms. They held each other as the violinist played and the candles flickered. For the first time in her life, Grace felt truly complete. But happiness, as Grace would soon learn, has a way of attracting enemies. Across town, Derek was at his lowest point. The Wellington takeover had been completed. He had lost his company, his position, everything he had built. Veronica had left him too. The moment the money dried up, she was gone. She said she didn't sign up for poverty. She said he was a loser. She said the same cruel things he had once said to Grace. Now Derek lived in a tiny apartment, working a job he hated, eaten alive by bitterness. One night he was scrolling through social media when a headline caught his eye. Billionaire Marcus Wellington engaged 2 mystery women. Derek clicked on the article out of curiosity. When the picture loaded, his phone slipped from his hand and clattered on the floor. The woman in the picture, smiling radiantly beside Marcus Wellington, was Grace. His pathetic, worthless ex-wife who he had thrown out with nothing. She was engaged to a billionaire. Derek felt something dark and ugly rising in his chest. Rage, envy, hatred. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no, this can't be happening." He picked up his phone and stared at the picture, at Grace's happy face, at the enormous diamond on her finger, at the way Marcus looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. It should have been him. He should have been the successful one. He should have been the happy one. Instead, the woman he had discarded like garbage was now living the life of his dreams. "This isn't right," Derek muttered. "She doesn't deserve this. She doesn't deserve any of this." A plan started forming in his twisted mind, a way to take back what he believed was rightfully his, a way to destroy Grace's happiness like she had destroyed his life. He didn't know how yet, but he would find a way. He would make Grace pay for making him look like a fool. 2 weeks later, Grace and Marcus went to Westfield Grand Mall to buy wedding supplies. They walked hand in hand, laughing about flower arrangements and guest lists. Grace had never been happier. She had found love. She had found purpose. She had found a family in Henrietta and Marcus. She didn't notice the man watching her from across the food court, the man with wild eyes and clenched fists, the man who had been following her for days, waiting for the perfect moment. Grace stopped to look at a display of crystal vases. Marcus excused himself to take a business call. "I'll just be a minute," he said, kissing her forehead. Grace nodded and continued browsing. She was looking at a beautiful vase, imagining it filled with roses on her wedding day, when someone bumped into her hard. She stumbled, dropping her shopping bags. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said automatically, turning to apologize. Then she froze. Derek stood in front of her, but not the confident, arrogant Derek she remembered. This Derek looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. He smelled like alcohol. "Hello, Grace," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Miss me?" Grace felt ice flood her veins. "Derek, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Derek laughed bitterly. "I'm here to see my loving ex-wife, the one who destroyed my life." "I didn't destroy anything," Grace said, trying to stay calm. "You did that yourself." Derek's face twisted with rage. "Don't you dare. Everything was fine until you came along, until you somehow tricked that billionaire into feeling sorry for you. What did you do, Grace? What lies did you tell him?" "I didn't lie about anything." Grace started backing away. "Please, just leave me alone." But Derek grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "You ruined me," he hissed. "You took everything from me, and now you're living like a queen while I have nothing. How is that fair?" "Let go of me," Grace tried to pull away. "You think you can just throw me away like I'm nothing?" Derek's voice was rising. People were starting to stare. "You think you're better than me now because you have a rich boyfriend?" "He's my fiancé," Grace said without thinking. It was the wrong thing to say. Derek's eyes went completely wild. With a roar of fury, he shoved Grace hard. She fell backward, crashing into a display of glass items. They shattered around her, cutting her arms and legs. But Derek wasn't done. "You worthless piece of garbage," he screamed, kicking at her as she lay on the ground. "You're nothing, you hear me? Nothing." Grace curled into a ball, trying to protect herself. The pain was everywhere. She could hear people screaming, see phones being raised to record. Then suddenly, Derek was being yanked away. Security guards tackled him to the ground. More guards surrounded Grace, protecting her. And then Marcus was there, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Grace, Grace, are you okay? Talk to me." But Grace couldn't talk. The world was spinning. She could see blood on her hands, her dress. She could hear Derek still screaming in the distance. Then everything went black.